Tonight, a decision that will reshape American commerce for years to come. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court has reversed the sweeping tariffs on steel and aluminum imposed during the Trump administration. This closes a contentious chapter in U.S. economic history. The tariffs, a key part of the America First agenda, aim to protect domestic industries by taxing imported metals. Now, the nation's highest court has set a new course. The legal battle was led by American companies and industry groups who argued the tariffs, justified as national security, caused economic harm. They claimed the policy disrupted supply chains, inflated costs, and raised prices for consumers. The court's decision establishes a new precedent for presidential power in international trade. For companies relying on imported metals, this brings relief from years of elevated costs, potentially lowering prices for goods from cars to appliances. Domestic steel and aluminum producers now face renewed global competition, forcing a re-evaluation of U.S. trade strategy. This verdict does more than settle a legal dispute, it sparks a national conversation about America's place in the global economy. The ruling signals a departure from recent protectionism and reasserts Congress's role in overseeing foreign commerce. It pushes the nation to consider how best to support its industries while engaging in a deeply interconnected world. A new era in American trade policy begins. The tariffs at the center of this legal storm were first implemented in 2018 as a key part of the Trump administration's America First platform. The policy imposed a 25% tariff on most imported steel and 10% on imported aluminum, aiming to bolster domestic production. The administration argued that strong domestic steel and aluminum industries were vital for national security, invoking Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. The Commerce Department's investigation concluded that imported metals posed a risk to national security. This justification was controversial, as tariffs targeted not just rivals but also close allies like Canada, Mexico, and the EU. The move marked a dramatic shift from decades of U.S. support for free trade. The new approach prioritized protectionism, aiming to shield American industries from what was described as unfair global competition. Proponents believed this would create jobs and revitalize manufacturing. However, the policy faced immediate opposition at home and abroad. Economists warned the tariffs would hurt industries dependent on imported metals more than they would help domestic producers. Internationally, the tariffs were seen as aggressive, prompting retaliatory tariffs from other nations. These measures targeted major U.S. exports, escalating trade tensions. The result, significant economic uncertainty and a global trade standoff. The stage was set for a legal and economic showdown. The legal challenge against the tariffs centered on executive overreach. A coalition of importers and manufacturers argued the administration misused Section 232, stretching national security far beyond its intent. They pointed out that many targeted countries were U.S. allies, undermining the security rationale. The lawsuit warned that such a broad interpretation would let any president impose tariffs on almost anything, bypassing Congress's authority over trade. Plaintiffs documented economic harm, higher costs, layoffs, delayed investments, and price hikes for consumers. They argued the tariffs weakened, not strengthened, the U.S. industrial base. The core issue, separation of powers. The challengers asked the courts to restore the balance between executive and legislative branches. They insisted Congress, not the president, should regulate trade and impose taxes. The Supreme Court was asked to clarify the limits of presidential power and rein in executive overreach. The case became a test of constitutional boundaries in trade policy. The outcome would set a precedent for future administrations. Before the Supreme Court's intervention, the steel and aluminum tariffs divided the nation. While some domestic producers benefited, a much broader segment of the economy suffered. Industries like automotive, construction, and appliances faced higher raw material costs, making their products less competitive. These costs were passed to consumers, fueling inflation and eroding household purchasing power. Economic studies showed the benefits to protected industries were outweighed by widespread costs to consumers and businesses. The tariffs provoked swift retaliation from key trading partners, sparking a multi-front trade war. U.S. farmers and manufacturers lost access to major export markets, facing new barriers abroad. Retaliation disrupted global supply chains and led to job losses in export sectors. A 2021 U.S. International Trade Commission report found a small production boost for domestic mills, but a net economic loss overall. The policy redistributed economic activity, creating a few winners, but more losers. The fallout became a central argument against the tariffs. The real-world consequences were clear: disruption, uncertainty, and economic pain. The nation was left searching for a better path forward. The Supreme Court's majority opinion delivered a sharp rebuke to the executive branch's broad use of trade authority. The justices ruled that national security, under Section 232, cannot be defined so broadly as to include general economic competition. A direct link to defense or military readiness must be proven for such tariffs to be valid. The decision reaffirmed the separation of powers, emphasizing Congress's explicit authority over foreign commerce. Allowing the executive to use vague national security claims would nullify this constitutional check. The ruling sets a crucial limit on executive power in trade. The court also criticized the lack of rigorous analysis in the Commerce Department's investigation. The administration failed to show imported metals truly threaten national defense. By raising the evidentiary standard, the court created a powerful new precedent. Future administrations will face stricter scrutiny when invoking national security for trade actions. The verdict was about legal authority, not economic wisdom. The decision clarifies the boundaries of power between branches of government. The message: presidential power in trade is not unlimited. The Supreme Court's ruling immediately eliminates the steel and aluminum tariffs. For thousands of businesses, this means a sudden drop in material costs. Manufacturers in sectors like automotive, aerospace, and construction are expected to benefit quickly. Lower costs could lead to lower prices for consumers, easing inflation. Financial markets responded with a surge in manufacturing stocks, welcoming the end of trade uncertainty. However, domestic steel and aluminum producers now face tough competition from imports. Some U.S. mills may scale back production or lay off workers. The government faces pressure to find new ways to support these industries. Internationally, the decision is expected to de-escalate trade tensions. Retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods may be lifted, reopening foreign markets for American farmers and manufacturers. The move helps normalize trade relationships with key allies. It marks a first step toward repairing strained economic alliances. The global trading environment is set for a reset. The Supreme Court's decision sparked strong reactions nationwide. Industry associations and business groups celebrated, calling it a victory for sensible economic policy. They expect lower costs, less inflation, and a more competitive global marketplace. In contrast, domestic steel and aluminum producers and labor unions voiced deep concern. They warned that without tariffs, cheap imports could flood the market, threatening American jobs and industrial infrastructure. These groups urged Congress to implement alternative safeguards. Politically, the response split along partisan lines. Free trade advocates praised the ruling as a check on executive overreach and a chance to rebuild alliances. Supporters of the America First agenda condemned it, arguing it weakens U.S. leverage and endangers workers. They insist the president needs flexibility to protect national and economic security. The debate over the right direction for U.S. trade policy is far from settled. The ruling has reignited fundamental questions about protectionism and global engagement. The nation remains divided on the path forward. This Supreme Court ruling will fundamentally reshape U.S. trade policy. Future presidents will face higher legal barriers to imposing broad tariffs under national security claims. The decision requires a direct, well-documented link between imports and a real threat to defense. The executive branch will need to work more closely with Congress on major trade initiatives. The U.S. may shift back toward multilateral approaches and international bodies like the WTO to resolve disputes. The ruling could help rebuild trust with allies and foster stronger global partnerships. Policymakers must now find new ways to support strategic industries through investment, innovation, and workforce training. The focus may move from protectionism to enhancing long-term competitiveness. Congress is likely to take a more active role in trade policy, updating laws and negotiating agreements. This rebalancing could lead to more stable, predictable trade policy. Both domestic businesses and international partners stand to benefit. The legal landscape for U.S. trade has changed permanently. The Supreme Court's reversal of the Trump-era tariffs is a watershed moment. It's more than the end of a policy. It's a recalibration of how America governs trade. The court has delivered immediate relief to businesses and consumers. More importantly, it has reined in executive power and reasserted Congress's constitutional role. The U.S. is now positioned to mend relationships with key allies and return to multilateral negotiations. This marks a shift away from protectionism toward a more collaborative global approach. The ruling challenges leaders to forge a modern, resilient trade policy that supports American workers without blunt barriers. The debate over protectionism versus free trade will continue to shape the nation's future. The essential question is not whether to engage globally, but how. As the nation moves forward, what will a truly modern American trade strategy look like? The court has drawn a new line in the sand for presidential power in trade. One era ends, but new possibilities emerge. America's next chapter in global commerce begins now.